Do 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 do. Extras.
So, right at the start of Ginaron, when they were entering into it, I had a little bit of a dilemma. I wanted them to take Temple 1 along with them for various role-playing reasons, or to interact with them, and I figured he might be useful down there. I just sort of wanted him to be there. But I wasn't sure exactly how to go about it, because I knew if I was pushy, or if I even resembled pushy, if he asked to go down with them, they would get suspicious right away. But when they asked him one or two questions, which was only natural, because, who's there? There was him, and there was one other just like him, which didn't seem interested in talking. So as soon as they started asking him questions, I sort of realized I don't have to do anything. They're not going to go down there and leave behind this potential font of information. So all I had to do was just respond to their questions, he would openly answer their questions, but answer them in a sort of minimal fashion. But whatever they asked, he would give his best answer. And then after that, just, sort of play up the C-3PO angle, and yeah, it worked out better than I could have imagined. It was just perfect. It was so natural for them, we should take him along. He seems to know about some of this stuff, and apparently he can leave a little temple entry area. So great. So that was pretty cool. That made me happy. There were a lot of things in there where I was very glad that the way I had thought through things more or less worked out. There were a number of options and ways they could have gone through things that they didn't exercise. I mean, they could have tried to fight the workers as soon as they saw them and certain things like that. But no, I was pretty happy, and I predicted things I predicted that as soon as Ikuatoa ran away in electrified water, that they were going to want to shut down the electricity to the water, or drain the water, or something. And sure enough, there was a room there. It was all designed, so a lot of the design worked out in a way that I was very happy with for this particular dungeon. So people ask me a lot how I create things, how you go about making a world, how you go about making an adventure. Especially on the level of adventures, one of the things, I can't always trace where inspiration comes from, right? You watch it, you consume media your entire life, and creativity is all about how you match things together. Even just how you perceive someone else's work can make a big difference in what you end up creating. It all gets melded in together. But in the case of Ginaron, I actually did have something fairly specific in mind. Have you ever seen the movie Resident Evil? Not the games. I actually haven't played the games. It's kind of criminal. I have a copy of Resident Evil 4, which is supposed to be a really good one. I just haven't got around to it because, I don't know, I keep making videos. Darn. But the movie Resident Evil, the first one, the way it played out had a certain feel to it that I thought was really good, and I thought would make a really interesting sort of dungeon for Dungeons & Dragons. And specifically what I was taking away from it was they enter into this place, and it's very mysterious and empty, and they need to go down and down and down further, and they keep seeing strange and disquieting things, and there's all this tension created by what's going to happen, what is coming, but there's nothing really for them to do. Nothing, and then they get to the bottom, and then all hell breaks loose, and now they have to fight their way all the way back up, and that's where all the action is, and that's where it's crazy. Now, for Dungeons & Dragons, you have to adapt things somewhat, and I wasn't going with the, zombie theme at all for this place. It's a whole different thing. But that sort of emptiness and, what is the deal with this place, that mysterious feeling kept up pretty well, even though I did place some mild encounters on the way down, so it wouldn't be totally boring. It helps that my players, or at least some of them and some of their characters, are very, very excited by books, and I provided them some books. Now, they didn't get to actually examine all these books when they were in there, and they needed to be able to translate them later. They needed some help afterwards and stuff like that. But this is a sneak peek. The books they found in the library were Avoiding Overreaction. That's the bright orange Don't Panic book, which had some defensive magical properties. It was basically like an offhand item from World of Warcraft. Then there was the Manual of Post-Mortal Destruction, which was that undead slaying tome from which you could learn and actually, by spending time studying it, gain a permanent bonus to damage against undead. That was interesting because it's reusable unlike most tomes. I mean, it's not as good as a tome of +2 to a stat, but it's reusable. You just have to have a certain level of martial skill to qualify, and actually, once your base attack bonus gets high enough, you can unlock potentially even more secrets from the book by trying to reverse engineer it. There were also a few other books. I think I ended up not naming a couple of them, but there was definitely Balancing the Energies of the Planes, Legends of Missing Deities, which is mostly what I recounted in the Legends of the Dead Gods video. There was a book on artificing theory, which eventually Draven learned some interesting practical things from. Like, he actually learned how to reshape a magic item without breaking the enchantments to some degree. So, for example, if they find a small crossbow and Angel doesn't want it, he could resize it into a medium crossbow for a certain XP cost. It was like a crafting thing, but it's a lot cheaper than making a brand new crossbow, especially if it was a very good one. But he actually learned a lot about the theory of magic that the Ytarrans had devised. And if I do say so myself, it's pretty interesting how the Ytarrans thought about magic. Now, the book had all kinds of equations and many practical ways to distill this information, but the gist of it is you can spend a certain amount of magic to take a masterwork weapon, to say a masterwork crossbow, and make it a magical crossbow, enhancing its ability, allowing it to do more damage, strike more accurately, and maybe do other freaky things. You can spend a certain amount of magic, and it does that. It has a certain gold cost, a certain XP cost. Basically, it takes a certain amount of effort and energy to cause that transformation, to take a very good quality non-magic crossbow and make it even better with magic. You could also, though, you could use magic and take just a rectangular block of wood and enchant it to fire a crossbow bolt, right? It's magic. There's no reason that you couldn't enchant a block of wood to function as a crossbow just by putting a bolt on top, pull it back, fire a crossbow bolt. Magic can totally do that. And logically, if you spent enough magic, you could take that block of wood crossbow, took a certain amount of magic to give it those properties, and then you could enhance it to make it into a powerful magic crossbow, right? You could make it into a +3 crossbow. But the amount of magic required to take that block of wood and turn it into a +3 crossbow is a lot greater than the amount of magic it would take to turn the fully functional masterwork crossbow into a +3 crossbow. Make sense so far? Of course it does. Here's where the Ytarrans really experimented and scientifically distilled some of the basic rules of the universe. Making the block of wood fire a crossbow bolt sounds like a pain in the rear, honestly. That's a lot of effort. What if you took all the parts of a functioning crossbow, gave them to an 8-year-old with a bunch of glue, a hammer, and some nails, and told him to make it into a crossbow? It has the stock, it has the bow part, it has all the mechanisms, and you show this kid what a real crossbow looks like. You say, go to town, make this crossbow look like that crossbow. And they'll take the parts and they'll spend an afternoon like gluing and nailing them together. And you'll get this thing that is shaped more or less like a crossbow, contains all the parts of a crossbow, but obviously isn't going to fire any bolts anytime soon, right? Unless the kid's a friggin' genius. But if you wanted to enchant that poorly constructed, non-functional crossbow to fire bolts, that takes less magic than enchanting the block of wood to fire bolts. Both of these objects do not fire bolts. They are not physically capable of propelling a shaft of wood and metal through the air. But one of them looks pretty close to like a crossbow and has all the same parts as a crossbow, and one does not. The one that is closer to being a functional crossbow takes less magic to enchant to get the same effect. Now you're getting it. So the Ytarrans, they know a lot about artificing. They could make a golem, right? You could make a stone golem. Take a whole bunch of extremely pure, perfect stone, you carve it into a nice symmetrical shape, and you can spend a huge amount of magic enchanting this thing to be able to move, to bend its legs somehow, to have basic AI, to be able to walk around in a humanoid fashion and smash things and be tough. You can totally do that. Those things are powerful. The Ytarrans found that it takes a lot less magic if the thing you are enchanting is closer to the result you want to achieve. So if they want something to walk around in a humanoid fashion, to have basic AI like a humanoid, if perhaps an uncreative one, what they did was they built something like a mock-up of a human being. They build it a metal skeleton, they put plating on the outside, a little bit like skin, maybe not so much. They fill it with fibrous bundles that resemble muscle and veins, almost resemble tissue, and these bundles are organic material, like plant matter. And they make this thing that is very much like a human, not just on the outside. I mean, your stone golem might look like a human on the outside. It might just be a statue. But they make something which structurally is much closer to a humanoid being which could walk around. It has joints in the right places. It has many detailed structural elements that they've devised. And that means when they want to enchant it to act like a person, it takes vastly, vastly less resources if they've done their job right. The book Lessons of the Dead Wars is a compilation of letters from designers of the Warforged, but also Warforged commanders from the front throughout the conflict. The sample account that I read to the players later on, after they translated all this stuff, was from a Warforged called Forcom 34, Forward Commander 34, in the 7th year. Along with the 4th Battle Cavalry and the 2nd Support Regiment, we swept the zombies from the plains of Gilam with ease, and with only one casualty who was beyond arcane repair. Though the wizards and artificers of the 2nd are utterly inexperienced in battle, they have done a commendable job in rebinding our damaged components. In this way, we advance almost at marching speed, and within 6 days and nights we have encircled the fortress the enemy call Sincross, perched below the southern face of a foreboding peak. However, even as we reattached our scouts and rejoined the 12th and 17th Field Infantry, who had fared slightly less well, clearing the mournful forest, we were met for the first time by the forces of the self-styled Duke Mironov. The Duke had clearly been busy since first reports of our advance reached him, and having learned that ghouls and wights are a poor match for the new Ytarran army, he had busied himself, hurriedly creating dozens of incorporeal monstrosities to harry us. They joined hundreds upon hundreds, we think over 1,000, zombies, along with a number of huge skeletons he must have been saving for us. And when this battle was joined, it was a whole different story. The waves of zombies were no longer hopeless, disorganized mobs, but rather a swirling ebb and flow orchestrated by a keen tactical intellect, constantly probing for weak points in our lines, where any regiment or even a single squad could be split off from our lines, surrounded and flanked from all sides, and such weak points were easy for him to find, as they were created by the flying fiends we've come to call wraiths. They seem able to drain energy from all but the most mechanized of us, and even our enhanced weaponry cannot reliably harm them. But worst of all was the one my men called Bloody Jack. Jack would pop up out of the ground, violate one of us, and redescend, all within the blink of an eye. Sometimes he would immediately strike again, other times he would wait and wait and wait below the filthy soil, where we could not reach him. He would wait for our readiness to wane, or for us to be pressed by conventional forces before lashing out once more. He left over a dozen of my men drained and motionless on the field, with no visible damage that could be repaired, and even when we finally stopped him, I sincerely doubt my blow actually killed the foul thing. I think the dreaded wraith merely retreated back to its master to be repaired so as to assail us again with full strength next battle. By the time the fighting died down, the stacks of rotting meat were so great that with only a little labor we built them into thick walls to shield us from the relentless skeletal archers who fired down from the walls of Sincross. Our bodies do not tire, yet we need time to recover, to assess our wounded, and to restructure the broken units into our command. And all this time Duke Mironov is no doubt summoning new horrors, while the fell earth belches up seemingly endless dead humanoids with which to swarm us again. I do not know how the land can contain so many corpses to fuel his necromancy, nor where the archers get the forest of arrows that they fire ceaselessly into our makeshift fortification. The other forward command officers and I are rapidly converging on a plan. My suggestion of walking the corpse wall forward is being seriously considered. We will gain ground only slowly, tossing the arrow-filled re-dead over the wall one at a time, but I believe our assault on the fortress will suffer fewer casualties if we can cut down on the amount of open ground our raiders must cover to reach the gates. There are tons more accounts, some triumphant, some even more dismal than that one. But some of the letters included in the tome are interesting in different ways. There are notes from artificers comparing the performance of different models of Warforged. There are accounts of officers, both Warforged and Ytarrans, that focus on the particular strengths and sometimes weaknesses of the Warforged troops. Even the first-person pondering by Warforged about their own condition, their purpose, their feelings, the question of souls. Though there is no narrative holding it together, you do learn a lot about the general flow of the Dead Wars, if not their causes. How the Ytarrans suffered horrific casualties early on, and how not only were they routed from the Shadowfell in short order, but the undead found a way to follow, and it was beginning to look like undead hordes from the Shadowfell might consume the Ytarran homeland and beyond. But then things turned around when the first Warforges got into full swing. The Warforged were not only larger, tougher, and stronger than Ytarrans, but they were immune to many of the putrid and or black magic attacks of different types of undead. Not only could they brush off ghoul and white touches, which were crippling to a normal warrior, but they could fight and march all day and night without sleeping, and even when they died, they could not be raised as undead spawn by the various plague-like powers, nor even by true necromancy. It took years to rout the invaders from Ytarra and to form a proper beachhead into the Shadowfell, and things went to hell again when they actually took the battle to the Vampire Kings themselves. But eventually, after Adar was pulled into the war, the combined forces of the Warforged and the Kineticists Guild were able to destroy the portal stones the vampires had been using to breach the Fadelands. And once that was done, the two sides negotiated an end to the war. Essentially, you stay in your plane, you'll stay in ours.
Please click the like button before it clicks you.